My name is Greystone. I'm 32 years old, and the morning of our graduation ceremony, I ironed my gown twice. Not because it needed it, but because I needed something to do with my hands. My brother Liam and I were graduating the same day. 5 years of late nights, ramen noodles, borrowed textbooks. I remember thinking sitting in that auditorium that this was the day everything would finally feel equal between us. I was wrong. We were halfway through our celebration dinner when my father cleared his throat, set down his fork, and slid an envelope across the table to my brother. $1 million. Seed money for his startup. Then he looked at me. Not with warmth, not with apology. Just flatly, like he was closing a tap. Grace, you're sharp. You'll be fine. Go earn your own. And then he picked his fork back up. If you truly love and appreciate your parents, take just 1 second to subscribe to this channel. It means a lot to us. And before you go, tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from? Dad sat in the third row that morning, silver hair, broad shoulders, the charcoal blazer he only wore when he wanted to look important. Mom was beside him, dabbing her eyes before the ceremony even started. It felt like a celebration. It looked like one. But somewhere underneath all the folding chairs and polished floors, something was already shifting. After the ceremony, we took photos outside, both of us in our gowns, smiling. Then Dad said he'd made a reservation at Rosewood, an upscale restaurant downtown, to celebrate properly. I thought he meant both of us. I thought that was the whole point. He looked at Liam and smiled, the kind of smile I hadn't seen him give in years. Warm, proud, certain. He said he'd been thinking for a long time about how to set Liam up the right way. Vision, drive, the instincts of an entrepreneur. Then the envelope. $1 million wired into an account he'd already opened in Liam's name. The table went quiet for a second. Mom smiled carefully. Aunt Renee whispered something. Liam looked stunned, then grateful, then immediately comfortable with it. The way people look when they receive something they always, on some level, believed they deserved. I waited. I told myself there was another envelope. I told myself Dad was building up to something. I even picked up my water glass just to have something to hold. Then he looked at me and said it. Grace, you're sharp. You'll be fine. Go earn your own. That was the whole thing. And what I didn't know that night was that someone else had been watching all along. What hurt wasn't the money. I had job prospects. I wasn't destitute. What hurt was the look on his face when he said it. Not guilt, not hesitation, just dismissal. Like he'd already calculated my value and arrived at a number he was comfortable with. And that number was 0. I passed the bar 4 months later, took a position at a mid-sized firm. Worked 12-hour days, billed my hours, paid my own rent. I told myself I was fine. I told my friends I was fine. I called Mom every Sunday and kept my voice even. Liam's startup launched 8 months after graduation. Dad attended the launch party. There were photos online, the two of them in front of a branded banner, arms around each other, grinning. I liked the post because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I kept my feelings folded and stored somewhere I didn't visit often. I told myself I was moving forward. Then, about a year after graduation, my grandfather passed away, Grandpa Lou, 81 years old. He went quietly in his sleep, the way people who've lived fully tend to go. We all flew back home for the service. I sat in the third pew and thought about how he used to call me his iron girl when I was little. Said I had a spine most adults never grew into. The funeral was hard. The days after were harder. Then came the will reading, and everything I thought I understood about my family broke open like something that had been waiting a long time to finally crack. We were all there. Dad, Mom, Liam, Aunt Renee, a couple of cousins. The attorney, a quiet man named Mr. Calloway, went through the standard items first. The house, the savings, personal belongings. Dad received the bulk of it, which surprised no one. Liam got Grandpa's watch. I sat with my hands folded and told myself to just get through it. Then Mr. Calloway paused, looked up, and said there was one additional item, not listed with the general estate. A sealed envelope, left with instructions that it be handed directly to me, and only to me. My name was on the front in Grandpa Lou's handwriting, shaky because his hands had trembled in his last years, but unmistakably his. I felt the room shift. I felt Dad's eyes move to that envelope. I felt Liam go still. What was inside changed everything. Inside was a handwritten letter, 3 pages, both sides. Clipped to it, a certified transfer authorization made out in my name. The amount was significant, enough to change things, enough to build something real. But I barely processed the number at first because I was reading the letter. Grandpa Lou had written it 14 months earlier, 4 months after that dinner at Rosewood. Somehow he'd found out what happened. I never told him. I don't know who did. Maybe no one. Maybe he just knew my father long enough to see the pattern without being told. He wrote that he'd watched me my entire life, that I was the hardest worsting person in our family, and that he was sorry I'd grown up in a house where that was treated as a reason to expect less from, rather than give more to. He wrote that he didn't believe in punishing people for being capable. He wrote that he loved my father, but that he had watched him make a choice at that dinner table that Lou would not be repeating. He wrote, "Grace, the world will try to convince you that the people who need the least help deserve it most. Don't believe that. You earned this. Not because you struggled, but because you never stopped." By the second page, I was crying, not quietly. Aunt Renee reached across and put her hand over mine. Mom had tears running down her face, though she hadn't read a word of it. Then my father's chair scraped back. He stood up, his face gone deep, mottled red. He looked at Mr. Calloway and said there must be some mistake. His voice was controlled for about 4 seconds. Then it wasn't. He said his father had no right to make private financial decisions without consulting the family. He said Lou hadn't been in his right mind toward the end, a lie so transparent and so cruel that Aunt Renee stood up and told him to stop talking. He didn't stop. He got louder. He pointed at the envelope, at Mr. Calloway, eventually at me. Said I'd somehow influenced his father, said this wasn't fair. Said the word fair with a fury that would have been almost funny if it hadn't come from the same man who told me to go earn my own while handing my brother $1 million across a restaurant table. I folded the letter. I put it back in the envelope. I picked up the document, and I looked at my father, really looked at him, the way I'd been too hurt and too stunned to look at him that night at Rosewood. And I said nothing, because I'd learned by then that the most powerful response to someone screaming is to simply let the room hear them. He eventually stopped. The way a storm eventually stops, not because it decided to, but because it ran through something. I thanked Mr. Calloway. I hugged Aunt Renee. I walked out into the afternoon light and sat in my car for a long time, holding that envelope against my chest, thinking about Grandpa Lou calling me his iron girl when I was 7 years old, thinking about how my father's voice screaming in that conference room was the first time in a year he'd directed that much energy toward me. And it took his own father choosing me to make it happen. I used that inheritance to open my own practice 18 months later. Small at first, just me and a paralegal named Deb. An office with secondhand furniture and plants I refused to let die. It grew. It kept growing. And every morning when I unlock that front door, I think about a shaky-handed letter from a man who saw me when it counted most. I don't need my father's approval anymore. I stopped waiting for it somewhere between the will reading and the first time a client cried in my office because I'd gotten them a result no one else believed was possible. That feeling is worth more than any envelope.